The restaurant fell into an eerie silence, the kind that follows a public declaration of death. In this case, it was the death of a relationship, announced not with a whisper, but with a flick of a perfectly manicured wrist. 6 pairs of eyes, gleaming under the artfully dim lighting of Soho's trendiest new establishment, locked onto Julian Vance. They were waiting. He felt his heart pound, a frantic, angry rhythm, against the bespoke fabric of his shirt. Sloane Parker's words echoed in the sudden vacuum of sound, sharp and crystalline. "Oh God, Julian, if you don't like my friend's rude jokes, you can just pay and leave." The woman he had shared his bed with for 6 months, the woman for whom he'd rescheduled client meetings and crossed oceans, had just declared, in front of her giggling acolytes, that his feelings were worth less than the overpriced cocktails they were downing at his expense. He looked down at his barely touched $300 Wagyu steak. The marbled red meat was now as cold and unresponsive as the expression in Sloane's honey-colored eyes. For a split second, Julian saw their reflection in the polished silverware on the table. Her, confident and dismissive, a queen in her court of jesters. And him, a walking platinum card she'd finally grown tired of swiping. The men around the table, with their carefully cultivated stubble and self-satisfied smirks, looked like vultures. The women, with identical hair and surgically enhanced pouts, looked like their beautiful, hollow prey. A hurricane of rage and humiliation raged inside him, a storm of itemized grievances and emotional breaches of contract. But on the outside, Julian Vance, senior partner at Sterling & Croft, the man who never lost a negotiation, remained placid. His face was a mask of calm indifference. "Check, please," he said, his voice shockingly steady. It cut through the silence with the finality of a judge's gavel. He didn't wait for a response from the table. He signaled the waiter, a young man who had been nervously observing the unfolding drama. Julian pulled out his wallet, the supple Italian leather cool against his heated skin, and extracted his platinum card. He handed it to the waiter without even glancing at the total. "Cover everything," he instructed, his voice low and precise. "Everything they have ordered tonight, and anything else they might want." As he signed the receipt with a deliberate flourish, adding a tip that was larger than most people's weekly grocery bill, he caught a flicker of something in Sloane's eyes. Confusion. Maybe a sliver of regret. It didn't matter anymore. He had been a fool for 6 months, blinded by a supernova of beauty and spontaneity. He would not be a fool for 1 more minute. He stood, buttoning his Tom Ford jacket with practiced precision. He adjusted his cufflinks. He was reassembling the armor he had so foolishly let down. Then, looking directly at Sloane, whose smile had finally faltered, he added the final clause to their verbal contract. "It's all paid for. That's what you wanted, right?" He walked out without waiting for her answer. The cool Manhattan night air hit his face like a well-deserved slap, shocking him back to reality. But what Sloane didn't know, what she and her vapid friends couldn't possibly understand, was that Julian Vance didn't just negotiate multi-million-dollar deals for a living. He settled scores. And he was just getting started. 6 months earlier, Julian Vance was delivering the closing argument in a $200 million merger. He was in his element, a predator in a boardroom jungle, wielding clauses and sub-clauses like surgical instruments. At 30, he had already closed deals that made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. His reputation was simple. He never lost. That day, he was dissecting the opposition's arguments with clinical precision when he first spotted her. While everyone else in the conference room was frantically taking notes or sweating under the pressure, Sloane Parker was lounging in the back row, scrolling through her phone with the casual disinterest of someone who knew they were the most important person in any room. After the meeting concluded and hands were shaken, she approached him. She moved with a confident stride that matched the boldness of her floral dress in a room full of navy and charcoal suits. "That was quite a performance," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Sloane Parker, I cover the men behind the money for my platforms." Her handshake was firm, her smile measured. Practiced, he'd later realize. Up close, her eyes were a mesmerizing kaleidoscope of amber and gold under the fluorescent lights. "Julian Vance," he replied, intrigued despite himself. "What platforms would those be?" She laughed, a sound both practiced and surprisingly genuine. "You really don't know? I have 3 million followers across my channels. I'm kind of a big deal in the lifestyle space." There was something refreshing about her directness in a world where everyone spoke in carefully constructed paragraphs designed to reveal nothing. "I'd like to interview you," she continued. "My audience would eat up your whole," she gestured vaguely at him, power lawyer aesthetic. Plus, I've never featured someone who could destroy a man's career with a semicolon. He found himself agreeing before he had even processed the request. That wasn't like him. He analyzed everything, considered all angles, anticipated weaknesses. But with Sloan, he just said yes. Their first interview over coffee turned into dinner at Le Bernardin. Dinner led to drinks at a speakeasy in the East Village he didn't know existed. Drinks led to a sunrise walk along the Hudson River, where she took photos of the light reflecting off the water and explained the difference between content and storytelling. Anyone can post a pretty picture, she'd said, her eyes alight with passion. But this tells a story about the city waking up, about new beginnings. By the time she finished the sentence, she was looking at him instead of her phone. 2 weeks later, she moved into his Tribeca apartment. Living with Sloan was like trying to contain a supernova within 4 walls. She was brilliant, unpredictable, and occasionally destructive. She transformed his minimalist, almost sterile space into something from an Architectural Digest spread, complete with absurd throw pillows that seemed to multiply when he wasn't looking, and art pieces that cost more than his first car. "Your place was so boring," she declared when he questioned the sudden appearance of a neon pink ottoman. It looked like a fancy hotel room no one actually lives in. His life, previously governed by the predictable rhythm of court dates and client meetings, now included impromptu photo shoots in their kitchen and mysterious packages arriving daily products from companies hoping for a mention on her platforms. He'd come home after 14-hour days of negotiating contract terms to find her bathed in the glow of a ring light, talking to her phone about the transformative properties of some overpriced face cream. But there was magic in it too. While he was planning 5 years ahead, she was extracting every ounce of joy from the current moment. She dragged him to underground art shows, to hole-in-the-wall restaurants with food that redefined his understanding of flavor, and to rooftop parties with people whose names he'd only seen in magazines. "You work so hard making money," she told him once, as they watched the sunrise from a Brooklyn rooftop, "but you forget to enjoy spending it." She wasn't wrong. Before Sloan, his idea of splurging was upgrading to first class. She taught him that money could buy experiences, not just status symbols. In her whirlwind of chaos and color, Julian found a part of himself he didn't know was missing. He fell, harder and faster than he'd ever thought possible. The first crack in their perfect, curated world appeared around month 4. It wasn't a dramatic schism, but a subtle hairline fracture in the foundation of their relationship. Julian began to notice the financial imbalance. Sloan made money from sponsored posts and brand partnerships, but it was irregular. Meanwhile, she had developed expensive tastes that aligned with the high-end persona she projected online. "These influencer events are important for networking, babe," she'd explain when he questioned a $700 outfit for a product launch party. "Would you go to court in a cheap suit?" She had a point. Image was currency in her world, just as reputation was in his. So, he covered more than his share. Rent, utilities, dinners, weekend getaways that she'd document meticulously for her followers. He could afford it, and seeing her happy gave him a satisfaction he couldn't quite explain. But sometimes, in quiet moments alone, the lawyer in him would wonder if he was being smart or just being used. The warning bells grew louder during a dinner at Daniel, meant to celebrate a hostile takeover he had just masterminded. It was a massive victory that had made the front page of every financial publication. Sloan wore a slinky red dress that a brand had sent her, a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Do you like it?" she asked, twirling as the maitre d' led them to their table. Throughout dinner, she spent more time taking photos of the food than eating it, arranging the cutlery just so and finding the perfect angle. When he gently suggested she put her phone away so they could talk, she looked at him as if he'd suggested she stop breathing. "This is literally my job, Julian," she'd said, a hint of annoyance in her tone. "This dinner will reach hundreds of thousands of people. It's exposure." "I thought this dinner was about us celebrating," he replied, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. She reached across the table and patted his hand condescendingly. "It can be both, babe. Multitasking." And later that night, as she edited photos in bed, he asked casually, "Do you ever post anything that's just for you, not for the followers?" She looked up, genuinely puzzled. What would be the point of that? He should have recognized it then. The fundamental difference in how they viewed the world. For him, private moments were treasured. For Sloan, nothing was real until it was shared, validated by a cascade of likes and comments, but he was in too deep to see clearly. The breaking point was a luxury vacation to St. Bart's. It's the perfect backdrop I need for this resort wear campaign, she had pitched it. He agreed, even though it meant rescheduling important meetings. The vacation was a disaster. It wasn't a vacation. It was a non-stop, high-stress photo shoot. Julian was no longer her boyfriend, but her unpaid personal photographer, assistant, and bag carrier. Could you take this one again? The lighting's all wrong, she'd say for the 20th time, handing him her phone. When he suggested they actually enjoy the crystal clear water or have a meal without documenting it, she accused him of not supporting her career. On their last night, at a romantic dinner he'd arranged on the beach, she spent the entire time responding to comments on her latest post. "Sloan," he finally said, setting down his fork. "I'm right here." "Oak." She glanced up, her thumb still scrolling. "I know where you are, Julian. I have eyes." "Do you? Because it feels like I'm having dinner alone." She sighed dramatically. "This post is getting massive engagement. Do you know how much I'll be able to charge for sponsorships after this trip? We should be celebrating." "We?" he said, the lawyer in him unable to resist picking apart her word choice. "That's interesting. This trip was supposed to be about us, but it's been entirely about you and your content." "Oh my God," she rolled her eyes. "Not everything is a deposition, Julian. Can you stop being a lawyer for 5 seconds?" "Can you stop being an influencer for 5 seconds?" he countered, his voice colder than he intended. The argument escalated from there. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. By the time they returned to New York, the supernova had collapsed into a black hole, and its gravity was pulling him under. In the weeks that followed, their apartment became a Cold War zone. They were two people living parallel lives that occasionally intersected but never truly merged. Julian threw himself into his work, taking on more cases than necessary, finding solace in the black and white clarity of legal documents. Sloan expanded her social calendar, often coming home in the early hours, smelling of expensive perfume and other people's cigarettes. The final invasion came on a Tuesday night. After a grueling 14-hour day in court, Julian came home to find their apartment transformed into a nightclub. It was filled with people he'd never met, models, photographers, and what Sloan called content creators, all drinking his rare Japanese whiskey and lounging on furniture he'd paid for. "Surprise," Sloan said, floating over to him in a dress that seemed to be made primarily of cutouts. "We're celebrating Zach's new skincare campaign." "Oh." Zach, whoever he was, raised a glass of Julian's $400 whiskey in a lazy acknowledgement. "A little warning would have been nice," Julian said quietly, loosening his tie. "Don't be such a buzzkill," she whispered, her smile never faltering for the imaginary cameras around them. "These are important connections." He retreated to their bedroom, seeking sanctuary, only to find a couple he didn't know using his bathroom to do lines of cocaine off the marble countertop. A white-hot, precise rage, the kind he reserved for the most duplicitous opponents in court, flooded him. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The woman looked at him as if he were the help. "Sloan said we could use any room," she said, sniffing and wiping her nose. He kicked them out of the room and locked the door, then texted Sloan from the hallway. "Get everyone out in 20 minutes or I'm calling building security." She appeared 5 minutes later, her face flushed with anger. "Are you serious right now? These are my friends?" "They're not friends. They're parasites," he said, beyond caring about diplomacy. "And they're doing drugs in our bathroom." "God, you're such a square," she said, then saw the look on his face and quickly added, "Fine, I'll wrap it up, but you're being really uncool about this." By the time the last guest left, their apartment looked like it had been ransacked. Spilled drinks, cigarette burns on the couch, and what looked suspiciously like vomit in a potted plant. "See? All gone," Sloan said, as if she deserved praise. "This isn't working," Julian said, surveying the damage. "We need to talk about boundaries." "Sure, tomorrow," she yawned, heading toward the bedroom. "I'm too tired now." But tomorrow never came. There was always another event, another deadline, another crisis with a brand deal that took precedence. So when she invited him to the dinner at Soho's latest hotspot, he knew. He knew it was the final hearing. He would present his case, and her reaction would be the verdict. He had gone hoping for an acquittal, a sign that the woman he fell for was still in there. Instead, she had handed down a death sentence. Julian didn't go back to the apartment that night. The cab ride from Soho to the Four Seasons was a blur of streetlights and fury. His mind, trained through years of legal education to see patterns and recognize leverage points, began to work. Sloan had unknowingly made a proposition, a verbal contract, pay and leave. He had accepted the terms. Now, it was time to execute them. He checked into a suite, the sterile luxury of balm on his frayed nerves. Then, he made a call to his assistant, Daniel, a young man used to his boss's odd hours and exacting instructions. "Daniel, I need you to prepare some documents," he began, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, the city lights glittering below. "And I need them ready by morning." Sloan returned to the apartment around 2 a.m. According to the doorman who texted him, Julian had helped the man with a tenant dispute pro bono, building a valuable alliance. She called Julian 4 times. She sent 7 increasingly angry texts. "Where are you? Are you seriously throwing a tantrum? This is so childish, Julian." "Fine, be that way. I'm going to sleep." "Actually, I can't sleep because you're being weird. Call me." "Hello?" "Whatever." He didn't respond. He was working, collaborating with Daniel via email, preparing what would become the most precisely calculated response of his career. At exactly 9 a.m., when he knew Sloan would be just waking up, she claimed early mornings were for people without passion. Daniel hand-delivered a thick envelope to their apartment. Inside was a letter on his firm's official letterhead, along with a meticulously detailed spreadsheet that ran for 5 pages. The letter read, "Dear Miss Parker, in accordance with the verbal agreement established on the evening of the 15th of June, wherein you stated the terms of our relationship as pay and leave, I am hereby providing a comprehensive accounting of shared expenses incurred during our cohabitation from the 10th of January to the 15th of June. As you will note in the attached documentation, I have previously covered 100% of our joint expenses, including but not limited to residential rent and utilities, all shared dining experiences, travel expenses for our trips to Miami, St. Bart's, and Aspen, and miscellaneous shared purchases including home furnishings and transportation services. Given your clarification of terms, I am requesting reimbursement for your 50% share of these expenses, totaling $126,742.58. This figure has been calculated with consideration for your occasional contributions and excludes any purchases made solely for my personal use. Please remit payment within 30 days to avoid the necessity of further legal action. Sincerely, Julian Vance, Partner, Sterling and Croft LLP. And then, a handwritten postscript. P.S. Sloan, since you clearly established the financial paradigm of our relationship, I'm simply applying the principle retroactively. I've already handled the leave portion. The pay part is now in your hands. J. At 10:30 a.m., she appeared at his office. His assistant, following instructions, told her Julian was unavailable but offered her a seat. She waited for 3 hours. When he finally emerged from a genuine meeting, he nodded to Daniel, who promptly left, closing the door behind him. Sloan looked different. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back. She was wearing what she called her real person clothes jeans and a plain sweater. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, waving the letter, her hand trembling. "I believe the document is self-explanatory," he replied, leaning against his desk. "You established the terms. I'm complying." "This is insane. Over $100,000? You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about financial agreements, Sloan. That's literally my job." She paced his office, her composure cracking. "This is because I didn't defend you against a few stupid jokes? You're this petty?" "No," he said calmly. "This is because last night made something very clear. You see me as an ATM with a pulse. You were happy to let me fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford, but when it came time to show a shred of basic human respect, you couldn't be bothered. That's not fair. I never asked you to pay for everything." "Didn't you?" he countered. "Julian, this restaurant would be perfect for my feed. Julian, my followers would love content from St. Bart's. Julian, I need this dress for the event. You never explicitly asked, but you created situations where my payment was the assumed outcome." She stopped pacing. "So what, this is some kind of revenge?" "This is clarity," he corrected. "For 6 months, I've been investing emotionally and financially in someone who sees me as a convenient resource. Last night, you made it clear that your friend's cheap entertainment is more important than my dignity." "They were just joking around," she protested, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "If the situation were reversed," he said firmly, "if my colleagues were mocking your career, calling your work vapid and meaningless, would you have found it so amusing?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I don't actually expect you to pay this," he continued, his tone softening slightly. Consider it an itemized receipt for a relationship that apparently meant very different things to each of us. So, what now? She asked, her voice small. You're breaking up with me over one bad night? I'm acknowledging that we want different things. You want an audience and a sponsor. I want a partner. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the spreadsheet. Then, unexpectedly, she started to cry. Not the pretty, photogenic tears she'd sometimes use in emotional posts, but ugly, messy sobs. I didn't mean it, she said between gasps. I was just trying to look cool in front of them. They're not even my real friends. He handed her a box of tissues, unmoved. He'd seen her turn emotions on and off like a faucet. If they're not your real friends, why do you care so much what they think? Because they have influence, connections. They can help my career or destroy it. So, you sacrificed our relationship for networking, he stated, a final damning conclusion. She looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. That's not it. I cared about you. I still care about you. I believe you, he replied. And he did, in a way. In her self-absorbed world, she probably had cared. But caring isn't enough when there's no respect. Last night wasn't an anomaly, Sloan. It was a culmination. What about our apartment? All my stuff is there. It's your apartment now, he said. I've paid the rent through the end of the year. Consider it a parting gesture. Her eyes widened. You're just giving me the apartment? I'm giving myself peace of mind. It's worth every penny. He walked to the door and held it open. You should go. I have another meeting. She paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about last night. They were being jerks. Yes, they were, he agreed. And you let them be. She nodded, accepting the truth of it. Will you call me? Maybe when you're less angry? He considered lying, but she deserved at least this honesty. No, Sloan, I won't. After she left, he sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the city skyline. He had built a life on logic and control. Sloan had brought chaos and color, but she'd also brought a profound loneliness, the special kind that only exists when you're with someone who doesn't really see you. The case was finally closed. The aftermath was messy. Sloan launched a social media campaign, portraying herself as the victim of a cold-hearted lawyer who calculated love like a business transaction. Her followers flooded his professional accounts with angry comments. One particularly zealous fan even called the firm, demanding they fire him for emotional cruelty. His boss, Howard Bergman, a man known for his stoicism, called him into his office. Care to explain why we're getting death threats from teenage girls? He asked, a rare hint of amusement in his eyes. Julian gave him the abbreviated version. When he finished, Howard was silent for a moment, then let out a short laugh. Vance, I've been married for 40 years, and I'll never figure out women completely. But one thing I know, never date someone who values attention more than connection. Lesson learned? Lesson learned, Julian assured him. Life returned to its ordered rhythm. He worked late, won cases, and added clients. But something had changed. He found himself noticing the quality of light at different times of day, the specific blue of the sky after a rainstorm, the kinds of things Sloan would have pointed out. 3 weeks after their breakup, Daniel knocked on his door. Sir, there's a delivery for you. He handed Julian a small package and a handwritten note. The package contained a cashier's check for $10,000. It was a fraction of the amount, but more than he ever expected to receive. The note was from Sloan. Julian, this is all I can afford right now. I sold some bags and jewelry. I know it's not the full amount, but it's a start. You were right about a lot of things. I didn't respect what we had. I took you for granted. The apartment feels empty without your boring legal books and the way you hum when you make coffee. My friends haven't called since that night. Turns out, when you're not picking up the check, you're suddenly less interesting. I cry myself to sleep most nights, thinking about how cruel I was, how I let them mock you. It haunts me. You were the only person who ever truly cared about me, not my follower count or what I could do for them. You loved me, and I was too blinded by validation from strangers to see it. I look in the mirror now and barely recognize the shallow, selfish person I became. I don't expect you to forgive me or take me back, but I wanted you to know that you taught me something important about value. What has it and what doesn't? Sloan. P.S. I'm getting a real job. The algorithm changed again anyway. He put the check in his desk drawer, never intending to cash it. The money had never been the point. Later that evening, his phone rang. It was Daniel. Sir, Mr. Bergman wants to know if you're interested in heading up the new office in Chicago. He specifically requested you. Julian looked around his office, at the life he'd built so carefully. For a moment, he imagined what Sloan would say, something about the Chicago food scene being underrated, or how the light off Lake Michigan would be perfect for content. But Sloan wasn't part of this decision. For the first time in months, he was thinking only of what he wanted. "Tell him I'm interested," he said. "And Daniel, book me a flight to Chicago for this weekend. I want to see the city, not just the inside of office buildings." "Of course, sir. Anything else?" Julian thought of the check sitting in his drawer. "Yes, donate $10,000 to the Legal Aid Society, anonymous donor." As he hung up, he realized he was humming the same tune he apparently hummed while making coffee. It's strange, the things other people notice about us that we never see ourselves. Stranger still are the lessons we learn from people who come into our lives briefly, but leave lasting marks. Sloan had taught him to live more in the moment. He had taught her something about consequences. A fair exchange, no robbery. And for Julian Vance, that felt like a win.